Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. The crystal chandelier above the dining table caught every flicker of candlelight, scattering rainbow fragments across the white marble floor. 12-year-old Cassian Westbrook sat rigid in his chair, fork poised over untouched duck breast, while his mother, Vivian, glared at him with eyes that could freeze water. The silence between them wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that came before storms, before punishments, before everything familiar shattered into pieces too small to repair. Cassian's hands trembled slightly, not from fear of her anger, but from the weight of what she'd discovered just hours earlier. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her, the Seattle skyline glittered like scattered diamonds, each light representing someone's home, someone's life. But all Cassian could think about was the boy with dirt-streaked cheeks and eyes that held more wisdom than any adult he'd ever met. "You will never see that filthy street rat again," Vivian said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She wore a dress that cost more than most families earned in months, pearls circling her throat like a noose of privilege. "Do you understand me, Cassian? Never." Her perfectly manicured nails drummed against the table, a sound like tiny hammers striking his resolve. Cassian had spent his entire life in this golden prison, surrounded by tutors who taught him 5 languages, but never how to laugh freely, by nannies who organized his schedule down to the minute, but never asked what he actually wanted. Every friend was pre-approved, every activity monitored, every moment structured around maintaining the Westbrook image. He'd learned to smile at charity galas while feeling hollow inside, to shake hands with business partners' children who looked at him like a prize to be won rather than a person to be known. 3 weeks ago, everything changed when his driver took a wrong turn through Pioneer Square. Cassian had pressed his face against the tinted window, watching a world his mother pretended didn't exist. That's when he saw Elian. The boy was maybe 11, sitting on a cardboard mat outside a boarded-up storefront, sharing half a sandwich with a mangy dog that looked as hungry as he did. But what stopped Cassian's breath wasn't the poverty. It was the smile on Elian's face, genuine and unburdened, as he talked to that dog like it understood every word. For 3 weeks, Cassian had been sneaking out, using the service elevator his mother didn't know he knew about, walking 6 blocks to where Elian usually sat. They'd talked about everything and nothing. Elian taught him to skip stones in puddles, to find constellations even through city, light pollution, to laugh without checking if it was appropriate first. Today, Vivian's private investigator had followed him. The report sat on the table between them now, photographic evidence of Cassian sitting cross-legged on dirty pavement, sharing his lunch with a homeless boy, looking happier than he'd ever looked at any country club or elite private school event. Vivienne saw it as contamination, as her perfect son being corrupted by poverty's touch. She didn't see what Cassian saw, a friendship that felt more real than anything wrapped in silk and served on silver platters. "He's teaching me things," Cassian said quietly, finally finding his voice. His mother's laugh was brittle, humorless. "Teaching you? What could a homeless child possibly teach the heir to Westbrook Industries? How to beg? How to fail?" The words hit like slaps, but Cassian didn't flinch. He'd learned something else from Elian in those 3 weeks. That silence could be stronger than shouting, that dignity didn't require designer labels. "He's teaching me what it means to be happy with nothing," Cassian said, meeting his mother's gaze for the first time in the conversation. To be grateful, to be kind without expecting anything back. Vivian's expression shifted, something flickering behind her eyes that might have been recognition or might have been fear. For just a moment, Cassian thought he saw past the armor of her perfectly applied makeup and expensive clothes to something vulnerable underneath. But the moment passed. She stood abruptly, chair scraping against marble with a sound like nails on a chalkboard. You're grounded indefinitely. Your driver, your tutors, your security detail, they all have new instructions. You will not leave this house except for approved activities. She turned toward the door, heels clicking with finality. And if I see you anywhere near that boy again, I'll have him removed from the city entirely. Don't test me on this, Cassian. The door closed behind her with a soft click that felt louder than any slam. Cassian sat alone at the table set for two, surrounded by wealth that suddenly felt like poverty of a different kind. Outside, rain began to fall against the windows, each drop racing down the glass like tears the building was crying for him. He thought about Elian sleeping under a bridge somewhere, rain soaking through whatever thin blanket he'd managed to find, and made a decision that would change everything. His mother thought she could control who he cared about, who mattered, who deserved his time and attention. She'd spent 12 years shaping him into the perfect heir, teaching him that people were either worth knowing or beneath notice based on their bank accounts and last names. But Elian had shown him something else entirely in just 3 weeks, that worth wasn't measured in dollars, that friendship didn't require contracts, that sometimes the richest people were the poorest in ways that actually mattered. 6 months earlier, before Elian entered his world, Cassian's life had been nothing but scheduled perfection. He woke at 6:30 every morning to his alarm's gentle classical music, chosen by his mother because she'd read that Beethoven improved cognitive function in developing brains. His bedroom was larger than most people's entire apartments, decorated in shades of navy and cream that some interior designer had declared appropriate for a boy of his station. The walk-in closet held rows of designer clothes organized by season, occasion, and color, each piece selected by a personal shopper who'd never once asked what Cassian actually liked wearing. Before his feet touched the heated marble floors, a maid would have already laid out his clothes for the day. His breakfast preferences communicated to the kitchen staff, his schedule confirmed with each tutor and instructor. Everything ran like clockwork, efficient and emotionless, a machine designed to produce the perfect heir to a business empire built on real estate holdings across 3 continents. Breakfast was always the same ritual. Cassian would eat alone at the corner of that massive dining table, reading whatever book his literature tutor had assigned, while his mother reviewed financial reports in her home office, and his father, when he was in the country, conducted business calls from London or Dubai or Singapore. The Westbrook family existed in the same house but different universes, orbiting each other like planets that never quite aligned. Vivian would appear briefly, inspect his posture and table manners with eyes that missed nothing, perhaps comment on his upcoming piano recital or Latin exam, then disappear back into her world of board meetings and charity luncheons. She'd been raised the same way, Cassian knew, in a family where love was expressed through opportunities provided and standards maintained rather than hugs or bedtime stories. Her own mother had taught her that emotions were weaknesses to be managed, that the Westbrook name carried responsibilities that ordinary people couldn't understand. The tutors arrived in succession throughout the day, each a specialist in their field, each paid extraordinary amounts to ensure Cassian received an education that would prepare him to command boardrooms and navigate high society. Mrs. Chen taught him Mandarin and Cantonese, speaking exclusively in those languages during their sessions, preparing him for business dealings in Asia. Professor Mikhailov drilled him in mathematics and economic theory, using real Westbrook Industries investments as case studies, teaching him to think in profit margins and risk assessments before he'd even reached his teenage years. Dr. Santiago covered world history and political science, but only the parts that mattered for someone who'd one day influence policy through wealth and connections. Between sessions, Cassian had precisely scheduled breaks, never long enough to get truly absorbed in anything he actually enjoyed, just enough time to use the bathroom, drink water, and prepare for the next lesson. His mother believed idle time bred lazy minds, so every moment was accounted for, every hour productive and purposeful. The only escape Cassian had found was in the brief moments when he could look out his bedroom window. From the 42nd floor of the Westbrook Tower penthouse, Seattle spread below him like a toy city. Miniature cars moving through streets he'd never walked alone, people living lives he could only imagine. Sometimes he'd watch a group of kids playing basketball in a park blocks away, moving freely, laughing without checking if their laughter was appropriate, choosing their own friends based on nothing more complicated than who showed up to play. He'd press his hand against the glass, feeling its coolness, wondering what it would be like to be one of them, unknown, unimportant, but somehow more free than he'd ever been. His mother had caught him staring once and pulled the curtains closed. "Those people have nothing to offer you," she'd said, voice gentle but firm. "They don't understand our world, our responsibilities. You're being prepared for something greater than pick-up basketball games and mindless fun." Wednesday afternoons meant etiquette lessons with Mrs. Pemberton, a woman in her 70s who taught 3 generations of wealthy children how to navigate high society without embarrassing their families. She'd correct the angle of his handshake, the volume of his voice, the precise moment to break eye contact during conversation. She taught him which fork to use for each course at formal dinners, how to make small talk that revealed nothing personal while appearing charming, how to remember names and faces and important details about people his family needed to impress. "Your behavior reflects on everyone who carries your name," she'd remind him, adjusting his posture with a ruler against his spine. "Westbrooks don't slouch. Westbrooks don't speak with their mouths full. Westbrooks certainly don't befriend people who can't help advance the family's interests." Every rule was another bar in his cage, carefully constructed from expectations and obligations and the weight of generations of family legacy. Saturday evenings were the worst. Charity galas and fundraising dinners where Cassian was paraded like a show dog, perfectly groomed and trained to perform. He'd stand beside his mother in a tailored suit that cost more than Elian probably survived on for months, shaking hands with oil executives and tech moguls and political figures who'd pat his head and tell Vivian what a fine young man she was raising. They'd talk about him like he wasn't standing right there, discussing his future like it was already written, his choices already made. "This one's going to run the whole empire someday," they'd say, and his mother would smile, that proud, cold smile that never quite reached her eyes. "He's being prepared for exactly that." Cassian would smile back, say the right things, be the perfect son. But inside, something was always screaming. Nobody ever asked what he wanted. Nobody seemed to care that he'd never chosen this life, these responsibilities, this predetermined future. He was 12 years old and already felt like his entire existence had been decided before he was born. Elian Reyes had lived under the James Street overpass for 8 months, ever since the shelter system had separated him from his younger sister Rosa, and he'd run away to try finding her on his own. The concrete pillars that held up the highway above became his walls, the constant rumble of traffic his lullaby, the smell of exhaust and rain and urban decay his normal. He'd fashioned a shelter from cardboard boxes he'd found behind a furniture store, waterproofed them with garbage bags stolen from a dumpster, insulated them with newspapers collected from recycling bins. It wasn't much, but it was his, and it was better than the group homes where older kids stole your shoes while you slept and adults looked through you like you didn't exist. Under the bridge, he had freedom. He could wake when he wanted, eat when he could find food, spend his days searching for any trace of where the system had placed his sister. The other homeless people who shared his corner of Seattle's underbelly mostly left him alone, recognizing something in his eyes that said he'd already survived things that would break most kids his age. His days began with the sunrise, when the first commuters started their rush to downtown offices, and the night people retreated to their own hidden corners. Elian would fold his blanket, a ratty thing he'd pulled from a donation bin, still better than nothing, and tuck it into the driest corner of his cardboard home. Breakfast, when he could manage it, came from the dumpster behind Rosalie's diner 3 blocks away. The morning manager, a woman named Carmen, who reminded him of his mother before the drugs took her, would sometimes leave day-old pastries on top of the trash instead of buried inside it. She never spoke to him directly, probably because feeding the homeless violated some health code, but her kindness was in the placement of those paper bags, always accessible, always tied so rain wouldn't soak through. Elian had learned to be grateful for small mercies, for the people who saw him as human even when society had labeled him invisible. The city was his classroom, teaching lessons no school ever could. He learned which store owners would chase you for loitering and which ones would pretend not to notice if you stayed quiet and didn't scare customers. He learned that libraries were warm and safe, and no one questioned a kid reading in the corner, so he'd spend hours there, devouring books about places he'd probably never see, people whose problems were fictional and therefore solvable. He learned which restaurants threw out food that was still perfectly good, which coffee shops left their Wi-Fi unlocked so he could use the library's laptop to search missing children databases for any sign of Rosa. He learned that most people wouldn't meet his eyes, that poverty made you invisible even when you were standing right in front of someone, that the same person who'd donate thousands to homeless charities would step over you on the sidewalk without seeing you as human. But he also learned that there were good people, random acts of kindness from strangers who'd buy him lunch without questions, who'd slip him $5 without waiting for thanks, who'd smile at him like he mattered. His best friend under the bridge was an old man named Samuel, who'd been a mathematics professor before mental illness, and bad luck had cost him everything. Samuel was in his 60s but looked 80, weathered by years of sleeping rough and self-medicating with whatever he could find. But when his mind was clear, he was brilliant, and he'd teach Elian things that amazed him. How to calculate compound interest, how to understand probability, how numbers could explain everything from the stock market to the stars. Knowledge is the one thing nobody can take from you, Samuel would say, his hands shaking from withdrawal or cold or both, but his eyes sharp and focused when discussing mathematics. You can lose your home, your family, your dignity, but what you know, what you truly understand, that stays with you forever. Elian would listen for hours, soaking up information like a sponge, understanding even then that Samuel was giving him something more valuable than the spare change people occasionally dropped into his cup. Finding food was a daily challenge that required creativity and courage. Elian had a route he'd perfected over months, timing it to hit each location when fresh discards were most likely. The grocery store on Pike Street threw out produce at exactly 4 in the afternoon. Managers, too worried about liability to donate bruised apples or day-old bread to food banks. The sandwich shop on 3rd Avenue always made too much for the lunch rush, and the closing shift would bag the extras and leave them by the back door, where homeless people had learned to check. Elian never stole. That was a line he'd drawn for himself early on, a way to maintain dignity when everything else had been stripped away. His mother, before she'd disappeared into addiction, and left him and Rosa to fend for themselves, had taught him that how you got things mattered as much as what you got. "We might be poor, mijo," she'd said in Spanish, her voice still clear in his memory. "But we're not thieves, we're not liars. We survive, but we survive with honor." He carried those words like armor, protecting something essential inside himself that poverty couldn't touch. The dog, Max, had found him 2 months ago, appearing one morning like he'd decided Elian needed a companion. He was a mutt of indeterminate breeding, all ribs, and matted fur and eyes that held their own story of abandonment and survival. Elian had shared the last of his breakfast that day, half a stale bagel that tasted like cardboard, and Max had stayed ever since. Having the dog changed something fundamental in Elian's daily existence. Now he had someone depending on him, a reason to keep scavenging food even when his own stomach had stopped hurting from hunger. Max slept curled against him at night, providing warmth and companionship and the simple comfort of knowing he wasn't completely alone in the world. They'd developed their own routine, morning walks through neighborhoods where people were more likely to leave spare change, afternoons in the park where sometimes kind strangers would pet Max and slip Elian a few dollars, evenings back under the bridge where they'd share whatever food the day had provided. It wasn't much of a life, but it was theirs, and Elian had learned that sometimes surviving with dignity was its own kind of victory. The day everything changed started like any other Wednesday. Cassian sat in the back of the black Mercedes SUV, his regular driver James navigating through afternoon traffic, while Cassian pretended to review his French homework. But his mind wasn't on verb conjugations, it was on the conversation he'd overheard the night before, his mother on the phone with her lawyer, discussing how to minimize the company's liability after one of their downtown properties had displaced dozens of families to make room for luxury condos. "They'll land somewhere," she'd said, voice cold and businesslike. "People that poor are resilient. It's not our responsibility to solve society's problems." The casual cruelty of it had stunned him, the way she discussed human beings like they were inconvenient obstacles rather than people with lives and families and nowhere else to go. He'd wanted to confront her, to ask how she could be so heartless, but he'd learned long ago that challenging Vivian Westbrook only resulted in longer lectures about the harsh realities of business and the responsibilities of their position. James was usually as predictable as sunrise, following the same routes every day, timing lights and turns with precision born from years of experience. But today, a water main break on 4th Avenue had traffic diverted, police waving them down side streets Cassian had never seen before, despite living in Seattle his entire life. The Mercedes moved through neighborhoods that existed in a different reality than the one Cassian knew. Buildings with peeling paint and cracked windows, storefronts with iron bars and faded signs, people walking with their heads down and shoulders hunched against more than just the rain. Cassian pressed his face against the tinted window, watching this hidden world with fascination. Children played in a pocket park no bigger than his bedroom, their clothes worn, but their laughter loud and genuine. Old men sat on stoops sharing cigarettes and conversation. Homeless people pushed shopping carts filled with everything they owned. Street vendors sold food that smelled amazing even through the car's filtered air system. "Mr. Cassian, please sit back," James said, glancing in the rearview mirror with concern. "Your mother wouldn't approve of you gawking at this neighborhood." But Cassian couldn't look away. This was real life, messy and complicated, and nothing like the sanitized version he'd been raised in. They passed a corner where 3 teenage boys were breakdancing for coins, their boombox playing music that made Cassian's structured piano lessons feel lifeless by comparison. They passed a community garden where families tended vegetables together, dirt under their fingernails but smiles on their faces. They passed a group of older women sitting outside a church, sorting donated clothes, talking and laughing like they'd found wealth in each other's company. Everything about this world felt more alive than the sterile perfection of Westbrook Tower, more genuine than the carefully curated interactions at his mother's charity events. Then he saw the boy. Elian was sitting on his cardboard mat outside what looked like an abandoned storefront. Max curled up beside him, and he was reading. Not begging, not looking miserable, just reading a battered paperback with complete absorption, occasionally reading passages aloud to the dog like they were discussing literature together. Something about the scene struck Cassian with force. Here was a kid his own age, with nothing, who looked more content than Cassian felt surrounded by everything. The Mercedes slowed for a red light directly across from where Elian sat, and for just a moment, their eyes met through the tinted glass. Elian couldn't see inside, but Cassian saw him clearly. The dirt on his face that couldn't hide his features, the thin jacket inadequate for November rain, the shoes held together with duct tape, but also the intelligence in his eyes, the dignity in his posture, the way he held that book like it was treasure. "James," Cassian said suddenly, surprising himself, "can we stop for a minute?" The driver's shoulders tensed. "Mr. Cassian, I don't think—" "Please, just 1 minute. I want to—" What did he want? To talk to that boy? To ask him what he was reading? To understand how someone with nothing could look so much more at peace than Cassian felt with everything? "I just need some air," James sighed, the sound of a man choosing between his job and his conscience. He pulled over half a block past Elian's spot, keeping the engine running. "1 minute and I'm staying with you. Your mother would have my job if anything happened to you down here." Cassian nodded, already opening the door, stepping out into rain and noise and smells his filtered penthouse life had never prepared him for. The street smelled like wet asphalt and exhaust and something cooking from a nearby food truck. Nothing like the controlled air, quality of Westbrook Tower. He walked back toward where Elian sat, James trailing nervously behind, hand near his phone like he was ready to call security at any second. Up close, the boy looked even younger than Cassian had thought, maybe 11, but his eyes held the kind of knowing that came from surviving things no child should have to survive. Max raised his head, tail wagging tentatively, and Elian looked up from his book. Something by Steinbeck, Cassian noticed. The Pearl, a story about poverty and hope and human nature. "Hi," Cassian said, feeling suddenly stupid standing there in his designer jacket and Italian leather shoes while this kid sat on cardboard in duct-taped sneakers. "That's a good book." Elian's expression shifted from wariness to surprise to something like curiosity. "You've read it?" His voice carried a slight accent, Spanish underneath the English, melodic and genuine. "Yeah, for school. The ending made me angry." Elian smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "Me too." But I think that's the point. Sometimes stories should make you angry about how unfair the world is. 3 weeks after that first conversation, Cassian had become an expert at deception. He'd discovered the service elevator that ran from the penthouse to the underground parking garage, used by staff and delivery people, monitored by security cameras he'd learned to avoid by timing his movements between scheduled sweeps. He'd memorized his mother's schedule down to the minute: her morning spin class, her afternoon meetings, her evening social obligations, and found the gaps where he could disappear for an hour, sometimes 2 if he was lucky. His tutors thought he was in the bathroom or getting a snack from the kitchen. The household staff assumed he was studying in his room. His mother, when she bothered to check, was told he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The lies came easier than Cassian had expected, justified by the feeling that for the first time in his life, he was doing something real. The walk from Westbrook Tower to Pioneer Square took 14 minutes if he hurried, cutting through alleys and side streets, keeping his head down and his expensive jacket turned inside out to hide the designer label. He'd started carrying a backpack with food from the penthouse kitchen. Sandwiches made with bread that probably cost more than Elian spent on food in a week, fruit from his mother's organic delivery service, cookies from the private bakery that supplied the Westbrook household. At first, Elian had been hesitant to accept anything, pride warring with hunger on his face. But Cassian had learned to make it about sharing rather than charity, sitting down on the cardboard beside him and eating too, making it friendship instead of pity. "My tutors always pack too much," he'd lie, and Elian would pretend to believe him, and they'd share lunch while Max begged shamelessly from both of them. Elian taught him things no expensive tutor ever could. He taught him to see the city differently, to notice things wealth had made invisible. They'd walk through downtown Seattle and Elian would point out the small kindnesses happening constantly. The barista who gave free coffee to the obviously homeless, the business owner who let people use his restroom without requiring purchases, the teenagers who'd buy extra burgers and hand them to people on corners. "Most people are good," Elian would say, his faith in humanity somehow intact despite everything he'd survived. "They just get so busy with their own lives that they forget to notice what's happening right in front of them." Cassian thought about his mother, so focused on quarterly earnings and property acquisitions that she couldn't see the families her business decisions were displacing, and wondered if Elian was right. Maybe people weren't cruel so much as blind, wrapped up in their own worlds until someone made them actually look. They'd sit in the small park near the water, watching seagulls fight over scraps. And Elian would share stories that made Cassian's privileged problems feel microscopic. He talked about his sister Rosa, 8 years old when they'd been separated, how she'd cried and held on to him while social workers pulled them apart, promising they'd find a family that could take them both, but never following through. He talked about his mother, who'd loved them fiercely until opioids had loved her more, how he'd come home one day to find her unconscious and never seen her again after the hospital. He talked about the group homes where he'd learned to sleep lightly and hide anything valuable and never let anyone see you cry, because tears were weakness and weak kids didn't survive. He talked about these things matter-of-factly, not looking for pity, just sharing his truth, and Cassian would listen with his heart breaking, understanding for the first time that his problems, his controlling mother, his lack of freedom, his predetermined future, were still problems happening from a place of privilege that billions of people would kill to have. But it wasn't all heavy conversations and sad stories. Elian had this gift for finding joy in moments that Cassian would have walked past without noticing. He'd get excited about a perfect stone for skipping, teaching Cassian the wrist motion required to make it dance across the water. celebrating when Cassian finally got 3 skips like he'd won an Olympic medal. He'd point out cloud formations and make up stories about them, his imagination unfettered by the cynicism that wealth had taught Cassian. He'd befriend street musicians and know their names and their stories, introducing Cassian to a 70-year-old saxophone player named Jerome, who'd once toured with jazz legends, to a young woman named Astrid who sang for rent money while studying nursing at community college. Elian existed in a community that Cassian hadn't known existed, where people looked out for each other not because they had to, but because they understood that survival often depended on kindness. One afternoon, Cassian made the mistake of offering Elian money. He'd pulled out his wallet, soft leather, probably worth more than Elian earned in months of panhandling, and tried to hand him a $100 bill. "For food, or whatever you need." Elian's face had closed down immediately, his expression shifting from friendly to distant. "I don't want your money, Cassian." The words stung, but the look in his eyes stung worse. Disappointment, like he'd expected better. "I thought we were friends." Cassian felt shame burn through him, hot and uncomfortable. "We are. I have so much, and you have so little, and it doesn't seem fair." Elian was quiet for a long moment, watching a group of pigeons fight over a discarded sandwich. Then he said, "Fair would be if we both had enough. Fair would be if nobody had to sleep under bridges while other people have 42-room penthouses they barely use. But you giving me money doesn't fix anything. It just makes you feel better about how unfair things are without actually changing the system that made them unfair in the first place." The observation was so astute, so far beyond what Cassian expected from a homeless 11-year-old, that he just stared. Elian smiled slightly, the tension breaking. "Samuel, the old man who lives under the bridge with me, he used to be a professor, economics and social justice. He's taught me a lot about how the world works, why some people have everything while others have nothing. It's not random, Cassian. It's designed that way. Your family's wealth exists because somewhere, probably lots of somewheres, other people are working for wages that keep them poor. That's how capitalism functions. So yeah, you could give me $100 and I could eat for a couple of weeks. But your family will make that $100 back in the time it takes you to walk home, and nothing will actually change." Cassian had never felt more ignorant and more educated simultaneously. Here was someone with no formal schooling teaching him truths about the world that his expensive tutors had never touched, challenging ideas he'd accepted without question his entire life. Vivian Westbrook prided herself on knowing everything that happened in her world. She employed people specifically for this purpose: assistants who monitored her schedule, security teams who reported on anything unusual, household staff who kept her informed about her son's activities and well-being. So when she started noticing small changes in Cassian's behavior, her instincts sharpened immediately. He seemed happier, which should have pleased her, but instead triggered alarm. Happy children were unpredictable children, and unpredictability meant loss of control. He'd started asking questions during their rare dinners together. Questions about their company's practices, about the families displaced by their developments, about the ethics of wealth accumulation when so many people struggled to survive. These weren't the questions of a child being properly educated in business realities. These were the questions of someone being influenced by outside forces, infected with idealism that would only hinder his future leadership of Westbrook Industries. She'd asked his tutors first, subtle inquiries about whether they'd noticed anything different, whether Cassian had mentioned any new interests or concerns. Mrs. Chen reported that he'd asked about poverty rates in China during their Mandarin lesson, unusual for a student who typically focused only on business vocabulary. Professor Mikhailov mentioned that Cassian had challenged an economic model they'd been studying, questioning the moral implications of profit maximization when it resulted in worker exploitation. Dr. Santiago reported similar anomalies. Suddenly, Cassian wanted to discuss social movements and labor rights instead of just memorizing dates and treaties. All of it pointed to one conclusion. Someone was influencing her son, filling his head with dangerous ideas that threatened everything she'd worked to build. Vivian hadn't clawed her way up from merely wealthy to genuinely powerful by allowing obstacles to derail her plans, and she certainly wouldn't let some unknown influence corrupt her carefully cultivated heir. The private investigator cost $5,000 a day, but he was worth every penny. Marcus Chen had worked for the Westbrook family for years, handling delicate matters with discretion and efficiency. She'd hired him on a Tuesday, gave him 1 week to identify the source of Cassian's changed behavior, and waited with the patience of someone who knew that information was just a matter of time and money. Marcus was thorough, tracking Cassian's movements through methods Vivian didn't ask about and didn't want to know. 3 days later, he delivered his report in her home office, a manila folder filled with photographs and typed observations that made Vivian's blood run cold. The images showed her son, her carefully raised, properly educated, future business magnate son, sitting on dirty pavement with a homeless child, sharing food, laughing, looking at this street rat with genuine affection and respect. She studied the photographs with a mix of horror and fascination. There was Cassian, her Cassian, sitting cross-legged on cardboard like some common vagrant, a mangy dog between him and a filthy boy who couldn't be more than 11. There was Cassian sharing what looked like sandwiches from the penthouse kitchen, food she paid premium prices for, now being consumed by homeless trash. There was Cassian listening to this boy with rapt attention, like whatever words were coming from that poverty-stained mouth were precious wisdom instead of the ignorant ramblings of someone who'd clearly failed at every level of society. The worst photograph showed Cassian smiling, genuinely smiling, with a joy she'd never seen on his face during any of the carefully planned activities and educational opportunities she'd provided. Some homeless child had accomplished in weeks what she'd failed to achieve in 12 years, making her son happy. Marcus provided context with each image, explaining the pattern he'd observed. Cassian had been sneaking out for approximately 3 weeks, using the service elevator during gaps in security coverage, walking to Pioneer Square, where this homeless boy apparently lived under a bridge. They'd spend 1 to 2 hours together, talking, walking around the waterfront, sitting in the park. The boy's name was Elian Reyes, age 11, in the foster system until 8 months ago when he'd run away. No criminal record, no gang affiliations, just another failed product of the social services system. Marcus had run background on the boy's family: mother deceased from overdose, father unknown, younger sister currently in foster care in Tacoma. From what I observed, Marcus concluded, his voice professionally neutral, the friendship appears genuine on both sides. The boy isn't working an angle or trying to extort money. They just talk, like friends. Vivian dismissed Marcus with instructions to continue monitoring but avoid direct contact. She sat alone in her office after he left, staring at those photographs, feeling emotions she'd trained herself to suppress rise up like bile. Anger at Cassian for deceiving her, for putting himself in danger, for risking the Westbrook reputation by associating with homeless people. Fear that this friendship would corrupt him, would fill his head with socialist ideas about wealth redistribution and moral obligations to the poor. But underneath those expected reactions lurked something else, something she didn't want to examine too closely, a tiny, uncomfortable recognition of the joy on her son's face, a joy she'd never been able to give him despite providing every material advantage. She thought about her own childhood, equally controlled and emotionally sterile, how she'd learned to bury feelings under ambition, to trade happiness for success, to measure worth in dollars and power, rather than relationships and genuine human connection. For just a moment, looking at those photographs, Vivian allowed herself to wonder if she'd made mistakes in how she'd raised Cassian. If perhaps the golden cage she'd built for him was more prison than protection. If maybe her own mother had been wrong about emotions being weaknesses, about love being a liability in the pursuit of power and wealth. But the moment passed. She'd built an empire on discipline and strategic thinking, on understanding that sentiment was the enemy of success. Cassian would thank her someday when he was running Westbrook Industries, when he understood that short-term happiness meant nothing compared to long-term achievement. She picked up her phone and called her head of security. "I need you to increase monitoring on Cassian. I want to know everywhere he goes, everyone he talks to. And I need you to find out everything about a homeless boy named Elian Reyes. Everything. Where he sleeps, where he spends his time, who his associates are. I want enough information to remove him from my son's life permanently if necessary." The rain hammered against the penthouse windows like it was trying to break through, matching the storm building inside Vivian as she sat at the dining table, waiting. She'd timed this perfectly, knew exactly when Cassian would return from his latest unauthorized excursion, knew he'd walk in thinking he'd gotten away with it again. The investigators' latest photos were spread in front of her like evidence in a trial, each image a testament to her son's betrayal and poor judgment. She'd spent the last hour looking at them, letting her anger build properly, preparing the speech that would end this ridiculous friendship and restore proper order to her household. When she heard the service elevator door open, so he thought he was clever, using the staff entrance, she didn't move, just waited with predatory patience for him to walk into the trap. Cassian appeared in the doorway, jacket soaked from rain, backpack over his shoulder, and froze when he saw her sitting there. The color drained from his face, but to his credit, he didn't try to lie. She watched recognition dawn in his eyes as he noticed the photographs, watched him understand that his deception had been discovered, watched him straighten his spine like he was preparing for battle instead of breaking down in apologies. That show of courage sparked something in her, irritation that he wouldn't immediately submit, but also reluctant respect that he'd stand his ground. "Sit down," she commanded, voice cold as the marble beneath their feet. Cassian moved slowly to his usual chair, not meeting her eyes, but not cowering either. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken accusations and defenses, thick with 12 years of control finally being challenged. "How long have you been lying to me?" Vivian asked, each word precise and sharp. 3 weeks, Cassian answered, voice quiet but steady. "Every day for 3 weeks, you've been sneaking out to spend time with a homeless boy, risking your safety, risking the family reputation, risking everything I've worked to build for you." She watched him absorb the words, waiting for them to land with appropriate guilt and shame. Instead, his jaw tightened and she saw something she'd never seen before in her compliant, well-trained son: defiance. "His name is Elian," Cassian said, "and he's my friend. My only real friend." The correction stung more than Vivienne wanted to admit. The implication that all the carefully curated relationships she'd arranged for him, The children of business partners, the sons and daughters of society families, were somehow less authentic than friendship with a street child. A friend, Vivian repeated, loading the word with all the disdain she felt. Cassian, that boy is homeless. He lives under a bridge. He's a product of a failed system, a cautionary tale about what happens when people make poor choices. He has nothing to offer you except the wrong lessons about how the world works. She slid one of the photographs across the table, the one showing them sitting on cardboard, sharing food. Look at yourself, the heir to Westbrook Industries, sitting in filth with someone who will never be anything more than a burden on society. What do you think this looks like? What do you think people would say if they saw the future CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company fraternizing with homeless people? Cassian finally looked up, meeting her eyes directly, and what she saw there shocked her. Not shame or contrition, but anger of his own. Do you know what Elian taught me? Cassian asked, his voice gaining strength. He taught me that happiness doesn't come from having everything. He taught me that people matter more than profit margins. He taught me that someone can have nothing and still have more dignity, more kindness, more humanity than people who live in penthouses and pretend the world outside their tinted windows doesn't exist. Each sentence hit Vivian like an accusation, like her son was holding up a mirror to reflect back everything ugly about the life she'd built. He's been on his own for 8 months, Mom. He's 11 years old and he's been living under a bridge, and you know what? He's happier than I've ever been in this golden prison you've created. He reads books for fun. He shares what little he has with a stray dog. He knows the names of people you wouldn't even see if you walked past them on the street. Vivian felt her carefully constructed argument crumbling against the passion in her son's voice, felt her control slipping in a way that terrified her more than business setbacks or market crashes. You think he's your friend, she said, forcing her voice to stay level. But you don't understand how the world works. People like him, people with nothing, they're always looking for someone to exploit. He's probably been planning from the beginning how to use you, how to get money from you. He refused my money, Cassian interrupted, standing up now, hands braced against the table. I tried to give him $100 and he refused it. He told me that charity doesn't fix systemic problems, that my family's wealth exists because other people are kept poor, that giving him money would just make me feel better without actually changing anything. Does that sound like someone trying to exploit me? The sophistication of the argument, coming from a homeless child through her son's mouth, gave Vivian pause. She'd expected simple greed, easy manipulation, the predictable patterns of people looking for handouts. Instead, this boy apparently had political awareness and moral philosophy that challenged even her carefully constructed worldview. It made him more dangerous, not less, because smart influences were harder to dismiss than obvious gold diggers. Then he's even more dangerous than I thought, Vivian said, standing to match her son's posture. He's filling your head with socialist nonsense, making you question the very foundation of everything we've built. Cassian, we have obligations to our family, to our company, to everyone who depends on Westbrook Industries for their livelihoods. You can't run a business empire while worrying about feelings and fairness and all the soft concepts that this boy is teaching you. Maybe I don't want to run the empire, Cassian said quietly, and the words hung in the air between them like a bomb waiting to explode. Vivian felt something cold grip her chest. Fear, real fear, that she was losing him, that everything she'd planned and prepared for was slipping away because of one homeless boy's influence. Maybe I want a life where I can have real friends, where I can make choices about who matters to me, where I'm not just a puppet being groomed to take over a company I never chose. He was crying now, she realized, tears running down his face, but his voice stayed strong. I'm 12 years old, and I've never made a single real decision about my own life. Every friend is chosen for me. Every activity is scheduled for me. Every moment is controlled by you or tutors or security. Elian is the first person who's ever just liked me for me, not because I'm a Westbrook. Vivian walked around the table, approaching her son slowly, and for the first time in years, she didn't know what to say. Everything she'd done had been for him, to give him opportunities she'd had to fight for, to ensure his future security and success. But looking at him now, seeing genuine pain in his eyes, hearing the desperate need for autonomy and authentic connection in his voice, she wondered if she'd been building a prison instead of a palace. I'm trying to protect you, she said, and was surprised to hear her own voice crack slightly. The world is cruel to people who are too soft, too emotional, too willing to care about everyone. I'm trying to make you strong enough to survive it. Cassian looked at her with eyes that seemed suddenly too old for his face. Maybe being strong means caring anyway. Maybe real strength is being kind, even when the world tells you to be hard. Vivian couldn't sleep that night. She lay in her massive bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation with Cassian over and over, hearing his words in different tones, seeing the pain on his face from different angles. She'd given him the standard ultimatum: never see the homeless boy again or face consequences, but for the first time, her threats had felt hollow even to her own ears. Cassian had simply nodded, gone to his room, and closed the door with a finality that felt less like compliance and more like resignation. She'd won the argument, but lost something more important, and in the darkness of her bedroom, she finally admitted to herself that she didn't know how to fix it. All her wealth, all her power, all her strategic brilliance was useless against the simple fact that her son was miserable under her care and happier sitting on dirty pavement with a homeless child. At 3 a.m, she gave up on sleep and went to her office, pulling up the investigator's full report on Elian Reyes. She'd only glanced at it before, looking for ammunition to dismiss him as a threat. Now she read it thoroughly, and a different picture emerged. The boy's academic records from before he'd run away showed straight A's despite chaotic home life. His mother had been a nurse before addiction claimed her, had raised her children alone after the father disappeared, had tried desperately to stay clean for them before the disease proved stronger than love. Teachers' notes described Elian as exceptionally bright, curious, compassionate toward other students, always defending underdogs and standing up to bullies despite being small for his age. The social workers who'd handled his case after his mother's death had noted his fierce protectiveness of his younger sister, how he'd fought the system's decision to separate them, how he'd run away, not from rebellion, but from love. Vivienne found herself looking at a photograph Marcus had taken of Elian, reading to Cassian from a battered paperback, both boys so absorbed in the story that they hadn't noticed the camera. The image captured something she'd never seen in any photo of her son at carefully planned playdates or exclusive private school events. Genuine engagement, real joy, authentic connection. She studied Elian's face, seeing past the dirt and worn clothes to the intelligence in his eyes, the expressiveness of his features as he read, the unconscious care with which he held that damaged book like it was precious. This wasn't some street-smart con artist working an angle. This was a child who'd survived impossible circumstances with his humanity intact, who'd lost everything but hadn't lost himself in the process. She found herself wondering what she would have become if she'd faced the same challenges this boy had faced. Would she have his resilience, his apparent ability to find joy despite having nothing? Or would she have broken, turned bitter, given up? Vivian had always prided herself on her strength, but her strength had been tested with safety nets. Family money to fall back on, connections to open doors, privilege to cushion every fall. Elian's strength was the kind that came from surviving without any cushion at all, from getting knocked down repeatedly and choosing to stand back up. That was real strength, she realized uncomfortably, the kind that couldn't be taught in boardrooms or bought with tutors. And her son, sheltered and controlled and given everything material, had recognized it instinctively, had been drawn to it like someone who'd been breathing filtered air, finally finding fresh wind. As dawn broke over Seattle, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Vivian made a decision that would have shocked anyone who knew her. She called Marcus with new instructions. Don't follow Cassian, follow Elian, but not to gather evidence against him, to understand him, to see what her son saw, to watch how this homeless boy moved through the world and why his influence had been so powerful. Marcus took the assignment without question. He was paid to investigate, not to judge. And for the next week, Vivian received daily reports that slowly dismantled every assumption she'd built about poverty, homelessness, and the people who existed outside her wealthy bubble. Marcus's reports painted a picture that was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Elian spent his mornings checking on other homeless people in his area, bringing them water or food when he had extra, sitting with the old Professor Samuel and helping him through bad days when mental illness made the world too confusing to navigate alone. He volunteered at a soup kitchen 3 times a week, washing dishes in exchange for a meal. But Marcus noted he'd often give half his food to someone who looked hungrier. He visited the library daily, not just to read, but to help a librarian named Mrs. Park, who'd let him use computers to search for his sister. In exchange, he'd shelve books and help younger children find stories they'd enjoy. He'd befriended a street musician named Jerome and would sit with him during slow periods, keeping him company and learning about music theory and jazz history. Everywhere Elian went, Marcus reported, people seemed to light up slightly, like his presence reminded them that kindness still existed in a harsh world. The most striking report came on day 5. Marcus had followed Elian to a park where he'd found a wallet lying on a bench. Marcus confirmed it contained nearly $300 in cash, plus credit cards and ID. Elian had opened it, seen the money, and Marcus noted seeing visible temptation war with principles on the boy's face. $300 could have meant weeks of easier survival, proper food, maybe even a cheap motel room to escape the rain. But after a long moment, Elian had closed the wallet, walked to the police station 6 blocks away, and turned it in to the officer at the front desk. He'd refused the reward money the grateful owner had tried to give him the next day when the wallet was returned, saying he'd only done what anyone decent would do. Marcus had captured it all on camera, and Vivian found herself staring at images of an 11-year-old homeless boy choosing honor over survival, choosing principle over advantage, choosing to be the person his deceased mother had raised him to be despite every reason to compromise. Cassian lasted 4 days before he broke his mother's ultimatum. 4 days of staying in the penthouse, going through the motions of his scheduled life, responding to tutors with mechanical precision while feeling something inside him wither. On the 5th day, he made a choice that would change everything. He waited until his mother left for an afternoon meeting. Then he didn't just sneak out. He walked out the front door, nodded to the security guard, and went straight to Pioneer Square. If she was going to punish him anyway, he'd at least make it worth the consequences. He found Elian in their usual spot and the relief on his friend's face when he appeared was worth whatever punishment waited at home. "I thought maybe she'd convinced you to forget about the homeless kid," Elian said, trying for lightness, but unable to hide the hurt that had clearly been building.
Never,
Cassian said fiercely, sitting down on the cardboard without hesitation. "You're my best friend, the only real friend I've ever had. She can ground me, she can threaten me, she can do whatever she wants, but she can't make me stop caring about you." Max pushed his head under Cassian's hand, tail wagging, and for a moment everything felt right again, despite the chaos waiting back at the tower. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city move around them before Elian spoke again. "You don't have to risk your relationship with your mother for me, Cassian. I'll still be here, and we can still be friends when you're older, when you have more freedom." "That's the thing, though," Cassian said, surprised by the clarity he felt. "If I give in now, if I let her control who I care about, I'll never have freedom. She'll control everything forever. Who I'm friends with, where I go to college, who I marry, how I run the company. Every choice will be hers, and I'll just be the puppet performing her plans." He turned to look at Elian directly. "You taught me that I could choose differently, that I could care about things that matter more than money and status. I can't go back to pretending I don't know that now." Elian's eyes got suspiciously bright, and he looked away quickly, but not before Cassian saw tears threatening. "Nobody's ever chosen me before," Elian said quietly. "Not when it cost them something real." They spent the afternoon together, and for those few hours, Cassian felt more himself than he had in days. They walked to the waterfront, shared a pizza that Cassian bought from their favorite dollar slice place, threw bread to seagulls despite the signs saying not to. Elian talked about a lead he'd gotten on where Rosa might be placed, how he was saving money from collecting cans to take a bus to Tacoma to try finding her. Cassian offered to pay for the bus, for a private investigator to track her down, for lawyers to help reunite them. But Elian refused everything with that stubborn pride that Cassian both admired and found frustrating. "I need to do this myself," Elian explained. "She's my sister. I should be the one who finds her, who brings her home. Otherwise, what kind of big brother am I?" As the sun started setting, painting the sky in colors that seemed extra vivid today, Cassian knew he needed to go home and face whatever consequences waited. But before he could stand, Elian grabbed his arm. "Cassian, I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me." His expression was serious, more serious than Cassian had ever seen it. "Your mom, she's not evil. She's scared. Scared of losing you, scared of you getting hurt, scared of losing control of the only thing she knows how to love. Rich people, I've learned, they show love through protection and provision because they've been taught that emotions are weakness. She's probably never had a real friend either, never had anyone choose her just for who she is rather than what she can provide." The insight was so unexpected, so generous given how Vivian had treated him, that Cassian just stared. "How can you defend her?" Cassian asked. "She wants to remove you from the city, to make sure we can never see each other again." Elian shrugged, looking older than 11 in the fading light. "Because being angry at her doesn't help either of you. She's a product of the same system that made me homeless. A system that teaches people their worth is in their wealth, that emotions are liabilities, that caring about the wrong people will destroy you. She's trapped in her own kind of prison, just like you were. The difference is, you're trying to escape. She doesn't even know there's a world outside the bars." The observation was so astute, so compassionate, despite everything, that Cassian felt his eyes burn with tears. "You're too good," he said. "Too forgiving." Elian smiled sadly. "I'm not forgiving her. I'm just understanding her. There's a difference." When Cassian finally returned to the penthouse, he expected his mother to be waiting with lawyers, with threats, with ultimatums and consequences designed to break his rebellion. Instead, he found her sitting in the living room, staring out at the city lights, with an expression he'd never seen on her face before, something that looked almost like uncertainty. "Sit down, Cassian," she said, voice quiet, almost gentle. "We need to talk." He sat, bracing for the fight, but she surprised him. "Tell me about him," she said. "Not the facts I already know from the investigators' reports. Tell me why this boy matters to you. Help me understand what I'm missing." And for the first time in his life, Cassian saw his mother not as the all-powerful controller of his existence, but as a woman who was genuinely trying to understand something outside her experience. Vivienne had spent a week watching Elian through Marcus's surveillance, reading reports that challenged everything she'd believed about poverty, homelessness, and human worth. But reading reports wasn't the same as seeing with her own eyes. And this morning, she'd made a decision that would have shocked her business, partners, her social circle, and most of all, herself. She'd dressed simply, jeans and a sweater, no jewelry, no designer labels visible, and taken a cab instead of her usual driver to Pioneer Square. Marcus had given her Elian's exact location, and she approached slowly, watching from a distance before making her presence known. The boy was reading to the old homeless man Cassian had mentioned, patient and kind even when the man interrupted with confused questions or rambling tangents about mathematics that made no immediate sense. She watched Elian help an elderly homeless woman adjust the tarp over her shopping cart so the rain wouldn't soak her belongings, watched him share his breakfast with 3 different people before keeping barely anything for himself, watched him scratch the ears of that mangy dog like it was a purebred show animal instead of a half-starved mutt. Everything Marcus had reported, she now saw in person. The quiet dignity, the unconditional kindness, the resilience that came from having nothing to lose and everything to prove about the fundamental goodness of humanity. When Elian finally noticed her standing there, his expression shifted from surprise to wariness, body language becoming protective, like he was preparing to defend himself or run. She realized with uncomfortable clarity that she'd become someone children needed to protect themselves from. "Elian," she said, approaching slowly with hands visible, non-threatening. "I'm Cassian's mother. May I talk to you for a few minutes?" He stood up, chin lifted, despite the obvious size and power difference between them, and she felt a flash of respect for his courage. "If you're here to pay me to leave Cassian alone, I already told you through him. I don't want money." His accent was more pronounced in person, musical and proud. "If you're here to threaten me, you should know I've survived worse than anything you could do. And if you're here to tell me I'm not good enough for your son, I already know what you think of people like me." The quiet strength in his voice reminded her of Cassian's words, that this boy had dignity that wealth couldn't buy and poverty couldn't steal. "I'm not here for any of those things," Vivienne said, surprising herself with the truth. "I'm here to apologize and to understand." She gestured to the cardboard where he'd been sitting. "May I?" Elian looked suspicious but nodded, and Vivienne Westbrook, CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, sat down on homeless cardboard for the first time in her life. The wet seeped through her jeans immediately, cold and uncomfortable, but she didn't move. "I've spent the last week learning about you, Elian. Not through my son's eyes, which I assumed were clouded by childish idealism, but through observation and facts. And I've learned that I was wrong about you, about poverty, about what it means to have worth as a human being." She paused, struggling with words that didn't come naturally. "You've changed my son, made him happier, kinder, more thoughtful. You've taught him things I couldn't, given him something I didn't know he needed." Elian's wariness didn't completely fade, but something shifted in his expression, cautious curiosity replacing defensive hostility. "What do you want from me?" he asked directly. Vivian appreciated the bluntness, the refusal to play games or pretend at politeness, when honesty served better. "I want to understand how you've survived what you've survived and still believe in human goodness. I want to know how you can have nothing and still give everything to people around you. I want to understand what Cassian sees in you that I was too blind to notice." She took a breath, pushing past decades of conditioning that said admitting ignorance was weakness. "I want you to teach me what you've been teaching my son. How to see people instead of just their social utility. How to measure worth in something other than wealth." For a long moment, Elian just studied her, and Vivian had the uncomfortable sensation of being evaluated by someone who saw past expensive clothes and power positions to something more fundamental. Finally, he spoke. "You really want to understand? Then spend a day here with me. Not watching from cars or reading reports, but actually being here, seeing what I see, meeting the people I know. If you still think we're all just failures and burdens after that, at least you'll have earned the right to judge us." The challenge was clear, and Vivian felt every instinct she had scream that this was beneath her, dangerous, inappropriate for someone of her position. But she thought about Cassian's face when he talked about this boy, about the reports of Elian's quiet heroism, about the possibility that she'd been wrong about fundamental things her entire life. "Okay," she said, and watched surprise flash across Elian's face. "Show me." What followed were the strangest, most uncomfortable, and ultimately most transformative 8 hours of Vivian's life. Elian introduced her to his community. Samuel, the brilliant mathematician destroyed by mental illness, but still teaching advanced concepts to anyone who'd listen. Carmen, who worked 2 jobs and still found time to leave food for homeless kids. Jerome, the street musician who'd played with jazz legends before addiction cost him everything but his love of music. Mrs. Park, the librarian who let homeless people use facilities and computers because she believed everyone deserved access to knowledge regardless of their address. Each person had stories that shattered Vivian's assumptions about poverty being a result of laziness or poor choices. These were people who'd faced impossible circumstances: medical bankruptcy, mental illness, domestic violence, system failures, and were surviving with remarkable resilience despite having every reason to give up. Elian took her to the soup kitchen where he volunteered, and Vivian found herself washing dishes beside people who thanked her for help she was providing while wearing jeans that cost more than they'd see in months. She met a woman her own age, college-educated and previously successful, who'd lost everything after a car accident, left her with chronic pain and medical bills that destroyed her savings and career. She met a veteran who'd served 3 tours overseas and came home to a system that had no place for his trauma or his needs. She met a teenage girl who'd aged out of foster care at 18 with no family, no support system, no safety net, trying to finish high school while working full-time and sleeping in her car. Each story was a mirror reflecting back the lottery of birth and circumstance, the thin line between success and disaster, the fundamental unfairness of a system that rewarded some and destroyed others based on factors often beyond their control. By late afternoon, sitting in the same park where Cassian and Elian spent their time together, Vivian felt something crack open inside her that had been closed for decades. "I thought wealth made me superior," she admitted to Elian, voice raw with recognition. "I thought having money meant I'd made better choices, worked harder, deserved what I had. But watching you, meeting these people, I see now that I've just been lucky. Lucky to be born into a family with resources, lucky to have opportunities, lucky to have safety nets when I failed. And I've used that luck to judge people who weren't as fortunate, as if poverty was a moral failing instead of a systemic problem." Tears ran down her face, and she didn't bother wiping them away. "I've raised my son in a bubble that taught him the same lies. You've done in weeks what I couldn't in 12 years. Shown him the truth about what really matters." Elian was quiet for a moment, then spoke with the wisdom of someone who'd learned to see clearly through necessity. "You can't change the past, Mrs. Westbrook, but you can change what happens next. You have resources, power, influence, things I'll probably never have. You could use those things to actually help people instead of just making more money off their struggles. Cassian told me about your company, how you buy buildings and raise rents and push poor families out to make room for people who can pay more. You could stop doing that. You could use your wealth to create affordable housing instead of destroying it. You could pay your workers better, invest in communities instead of extracting from them, use your power to make the system less unfair instead of benefiting from its unfairness." He looked at her directly. "I don't need you to save me, Mrs. Westbrook. I need you to stop being part of the system that creates people like me in the first place." The words hit with the force of truth that couldn't be argued with or dismissed. Vivian thought about board meetings where she'd approved rent increases that displaced families, about cost-cutting, measures that reduced worker wages to maximize profits, about all the ways she'd participated in a system that enriched people like her while crushing people like Elian. She'd told herself it was just business, just the way the world worked, that her responsibility was to shareholders rather than the communities her company affected. But sitting here, seeing the human cost of those decisions reflected in this child's homelessness, she couldn't hide behind those justifications anymore. "You're right," she said simply. "And I want to do better, not just to feel better about myself, but because it's right. Will you help me? Will you tell me what actually helps versus what just makes wealthy people feel charitable while changing nothing?" Over the next 2 hours, Elian and Vivian talked in a way she'd never talked with anyone. Honest, uncomfortable, challenging. He explained why charity often perpetuated dependency instead of creating pathways out of poverty. Why affordable housing mattered more than homeless shelters. Why paying living wages was more valuable than donating to food banks. She found herself taking notes on her phone, asking questions, listening with the same intensity she brought to business negotiations. When Cassian appeared, having snuck out again to find his friend, he stopped short at the sight of his mother sitting on cardboard in actual conversation with Elian, looking more human than he'd ever seen her. The three of them sat together as the sun set, and Vivian made promises about changing business practices, about creating real affordable housing, about using Westbrook Industries' influence to advocate for systemic change. 3 months later, Seattle newspapers ran stories about the Westbrook Foundation's new initiatives. A $50 million affordable housing fund, partnerships with homeless services to create pathways to permanent housing, living wage requirements for all Westbrook Industries employees and contractors. The penthouse's spare bedrooms had been converted to temporary housing for youth aging out of foster care, with Elian as the first resident while social services worked to reunite him with Rosa. Cassian had a real friend, officially part of the family now, eating dinner at that massive table that finally felt less empty. And Vivian, for the first time in her carefully controlled life, felt like she was building something that mattered more than profit margins. She was building humanity, compassion, a world where maybe fewer children would have to sleep under bridges because people with power chose to care. The transformation wasn't complete, wasn't perfect, wasn't without struggles and setbacks. But watching Cassian and Elian do homework together, listening to them laugh about something she didn't understand, seeing her son happy in ways she'd never managed to make him, Vivian finally understood what it meant to be truly wealthy. Not in dollars or property or power, but in relationships that mattered, in purpose beyond profit, in the knowledge that you'd used your privilege to lift others instead of stepping on them to climb higher. And when Rosa was finally found and reunited with her brother, when Vivian saw those siblings embrace after 9 months apart, she cried tears that came from somewhere deeper than she'd known existed, from a place where love mattered more than control, where humanity transcended social class, where a homeless boy had taught a billionaire what it meant to finally be rich in the ways that actually counted.